All right, welcome back to the channel. You guys are watching Unbiased Magic Reviews, the most objective magic review channel here on YouTube. I got a lot of positive feedback from my top 5 any card at any number review. And if you like that, I think you guys are really gonna like this review. Today I'm taking a look at Going Home by Irwin. Now you can pick this download up for $8 from Penguin Magic. You're going to get over an hour of video instruction where you're going to learn 3 versions of this effect called Going Home, which basically it's an any card back to new deck order. That's what it is, and it's very original, very creative. I've had a blast road testing this over the past 2 months. I was a little bit skeptical in the beginning because I wondered if lay people could really grasp what new deck order is. But if you explain it carefully in your presentation, then it really builds it up to like a really amazing level. And what I found, unfortunately, was that afterwards, it didn't matter what else I did, they just would not stop talking about it, and they just wanted to know if it really was just an impossible coincidence or not. And so you'll really have a lot of fun with it, I think. So I'm going to show you guys what the effect looks like. I'm going to demo it for you. Then I'm going to go into those questions you probably have. I'm going to give you a good idea of what you're going to learn here on this download and what he goes over. And then I'm going to go into my rating. And I'm going to mention a couple of other effects that are similar and just give you some final considerations. So let's take a look at the effect. So let's take a look at what Going Home looks like. You introduce a deck of cards and you explain to the spectator that every deck comes in a new deck order. That's a numerical order until you shuffle them. Once you shuffle the cards, of course, you're going to lose that order. In fact, it's really impossible to imagine that you could even shuffle a deck of cards and it would go back into that order. In fact, every time you cut the cards, you also completely lose an order to the deck. So that's what happens every time that you cut the cards and every time that you shuffle the cards as well. So it's actually impossible for you to take a deck of cards like this and then shuffle it back into its new deck order. That would be impossible. But let's try something else that's possible here. I want you to just think of any card. So since you're not here, I'm going to use the ever reliable random card generator here. And our card is going to be the King of Hearts here. So you explain to the spectator that the deck, it's going to run in a numerical order from the clubs, hearts, spades, diamonds, suits. And so what we're going to do is, could you imagine how crazy it would be if the card you're merely thinking of, the King of Hearts, how crazy would it be if it got shuffled back into its new deck order position? That would be insane, right? Because obviously it's not possible to shuffle the cards where all the cards go back to new deck order. But how crazy would it be if just your thought of card ended up back in its new deck order? Let's take a look. If we start in the end here, we've got ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king of clubs, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king of hearts. So that's where your card should be if it went back into new deck order. And here's the crazy thing. If we take a look at the deck, you could see there is absolutely no order to these cards because you just saw me shuffle them. It's all haphazard. But how insane is that the one card you're thinking of, the King of Hearts, managed to go right back to where it should have. And that's it. That's what the effect looks like. All right, so you guys took a look at the effect, and I have to tell you that I did throw in there the Pharaoh Shuffle because I like to use it myself, but you don't have to do that, and Irwin actually doesn't go over that on this download, so you don't have to do that, but it really looks that good for your spectator. It's going to look totally impossible, and you're going to get some really good reactions from it. Let's go over some questions you probably have about this, and then we'll continue from there. So the first thing you're probably wondering is how difficult is this to perform? And it's really beginner level. There's no difficult sleights at all. The only thing that you really have to concentrate on is that after you practice it and perform it a few times, then you'll know exactly where to count from, so that way you always end up on the right card. I think that's probably the most difficult thing, but it's so simple that once you learn the effect, like in about a half an hour, you'll learn the effect, then you won't forget it. And it's very, very simple after that. And almost like semi-self-working when you really think about it. So I would rate this as absolute beginner level. I think anyone can perform this. You don't have to have any kind of proficiency really with a deck of cards. Your next question is probably, are there any gimmicks or gaffes in play? And there is no gimmicks or gaffes. You just have to have a full deck of cards. The next question is, what are the setups, or is this impromptu? And there's actually 3 versions. So the version that's my favorite version uses a full deck stack, but there's also 2 other versions that are taught. One version uses a partial stack, and then there's another version which is really completely impromptu because you only have to position 4 cards in the deck and then you're ready to go. So you could do it right under your spectator's nose while you're talking to them after they shuffled their own deck. Of course, the presentation's a little bit different for the other versions because you use a little bit of magician's choice in those versions. So there's a little bit difference there, but I prefer the version that uses the full stack. But of course, you're going to have to use that as your opening effect because of that. So the effect is repeatable, but I wouldn't recommend it because, as I mentioned, it's the impossible coincidence. You wouldn't want to water down the effect by repeating it. The actual cards are completely examinable when you're done. When you're done with the effect, I've had people look at the spread really closely. They're not going to notice anything because it looks like a shuffled deck of cards. They're not going to notice any kind of pattern or anything. Maybe your magician buddy might, but I even doubt that they would. Lay people, they just take a look at it for a second and they're completely amazed. They're dumbfounded, really. You know, they're nonplussed, so to speak. So that's really the reactions that I've gotten from that. And I found that this is totally examinable at the end. I don't have any issues with that at all. And there's no angle restrictions either, so you don't have to worry about that. So those are probably the most important questions that you guys have about this. In terms of what are you going to learn here, as I mentioned, the download starts out with Carl Irwin showing you a demo of the effect. Then he goes over how to perform the effect. He shows you how to build the stack, which is really easy. Once you do it a couple of times, you'll have it memorized because it's logical and it's very clever. It's very well thought out. You're really going to appreciate that. And I think that's the real value here of this, as well as all of the tips and nuances he gives you along the way. He goes over some really basic false shuffles that anyone can do, especially because you have to keep in mind that when you perform this for people, they're really only going to pay attention once you get to the point where you ask them to think of a card. And so that's, you know, so it's not, there's no heat on you during that moment when you're shuffling the deck. So you don't even have to worry about that at all. And then he goes over the variations of the effect. And at the end of the download, he goes over some ideas of how you can use other stacks to do the exact same effect. So you may have a stack that you use and you can incorporate it and use this same effect with your stack. The only difference is that there's some math involved, and he does go over it, although a little bit quickly. And that's what you can expect here on this download. And as I mentioned, my own thoughts of this is I found that this was extremely strong. The only real negative I can tell you guys about this is that there are 2 values that if the spectator mentions, you have to cut the cards before you count. That's the only real negative, but Carl Irwin does give you a one-liner so you can completely eliminate those. When you tell a spectator, I want you to think of a card, but don't think of a this or that, because that's what everybody thinks of. You know, that's what he tells you. And I actually did it that way in the beginning, and it works fine. And, you know, it feels very strong. But I personally found it even stronger not to use the line. I found it stronger to give the spectator a full free choice. I like to tell the spectator, think of a card, but change your mind a few times so that way you end up on a card that there's no way that I would have known it. There's no way I could have influenced you. There's no way that maybe you even thought you were going to think of that card. And by doing that, usually the person will think of a card that's not very popular. And so it's going to probably avoid those values that you're worried about. And the reason I like doing it that way is because at the end, you can circle back and you can say, you had a choice of any card in the deck. How impossible is that? So you could really build it up that way. And that's the way that I like to perform it. But I would also mention that that's the only real negative about this, because you have to cut the cards if they name one of those two values. Of course, he gives you some different ways to cover that in your own presentation, but I feel that the reason this effect is so strong is because when you start, you take out the cards and you're talking to them about every time you shuffle the cards, they end up in a random order. There's no way you can shuffle them back into new order. And then you spread the cards on the table, you ask them to think of a value, and you do nothing. You don't manipulate the cards anymore. All you do is count down to where their cards should be if it was back in new deck order, which is what makes this so impossible. And what I really like is that in almost every circumstance, the card they name is, you're going to actually count in new deck order, meaning that you're going to count from spades, diamonds, clubs, hearts order, which is the new deck order. So even if the person remembers that you said, new deck order, we're going to go spades, diamonds, clubs, hearts, and they later on, they look it up or whatever, they'll see that the cards run in that order in new deck order. So it's all very logical. And the best part I found is that you do nothing, and then when you turn the whole deck over and spread it out and they see that the cards are in a haphazard order, it looks like the cards are just in some random mixed up order, yet their one thought of card is in the position it should be. It just blows them away. It's like you pulled the carpet right out from under them. And as I mentioned in my own performances, I found that I used this as an opener, and then I had a hard time following this up because the person was just so dumbfounded that they just kept going back to the first effect. They weren't really paying attention to what else I was showing them because their mind was still focused on that first effect. They just couldn't get over it. So that's the kind of reactions that I've gotten from this. It's just really something that I think that if you're into card magic, do not let this pass you up for that reason. So let's go over my rating, and then I'm going to talk to you about a couple of other effects that are a little bit similar. So my rating is as follows. For originality, I give this 5 out of 5. This is a totally original effect. Very, very creative. So for creativity, I would give it 4 out of 5. And I thought it was very creative, especially because he gives you various versions of the effect. You're going to learn 2 other versions where there is a little bit of a magician's choice involved, but it still feels very strong to lay people. So it's a good option if you don't want to have to carry a full deck stack with you. So I thought that was very creative too. And for the teaching, I would give it 4 out of 5. The only reason I don't give him 5 out of 5 for the teaching is because at the end of the download, he goes over some ideas of how you could use this with other cyclical stacks, and he introduces some ideas with math that for some people may be difficult to grasp, and he just kind of went over it really quickly. So I give him 4 out of 5 for the teaching. For audience reactions, I have to give this 5 out of 5, the highest recommendation, because I got the strongest reactions from this. For practicality, I would rate this as 3.5 out of 5 because you will have to carry a full stack with you, but it is a normal deck. So it's something that you can have ready to go anytime you want. And I think it is practical because you can perform a version of this effect totally impromptu if you want to. So I give it 3.5 out of 5 for practicality. And for price, I would give it 4 out of 5. I think it's a total steal at $8. You're really getting a full lecture on this, very original plot. So definitely 4 out of 5 for price. So my final rating for this is 4.25 out of 5. Highly favorable. This is one of the highest ratings I give for any product. I would highly recommend this to anyone who is into mentalism with cards or even just card magic in general, just because you're going to get very strong reactions from it. It's super easy to perform, and it's just a lot of fun overall. So I think you're really going to like it a lot. In terms of any other effects that are kind of similar, I will mention to you that in my own research, I found that the closest effect I could find to this is an effect by Helder Guimaraes, and that effect is called the Practical Opener. That effect basically is like this. You take out a deck, you spread it face down on a table, and you mention to the spectator that you took out 1 card out of the deck. You introduce an odd back card, but you don't let them see the face of it, and you tell them that you want them to put it wherever they want in the spread, or you take it yourself and you hover it over the spread, and wherever they want to, you put it in the spread. only now do you gather up the cards and you start dealing them face up, and you show them that the cards are in new deck order. So you start showing them that they run in new deck order, and then amazingly, in that one place where they put the card is where the missing card is for the new deck order to complete the deck. So that was the closest effect I could find, because it's like odd back card goes back into new deck order kind of thing. But it does use a fully gimmicked deck, so that's the only disadvantage there, but it is slightly similar. This is why I mention it here. The only other effect I will also mention, which kind of has a similar flair to it, is there's an effect by Luis Garcia that was published in La Magia del Siglo XX, which it was called, oh God, what was that effect called? It was called, I think it was called Initiation Rite, or Rito de Iniciación. And what that was an effect where you take a deck in new deck order and you start shuffling it in front of the spectator, showing them that every time you shuffle the cards, they end up in a totally random order, and then you shuffle it back into new deck order. And it uses a very simple concept that probably most of you are familiar with, and when you read it, you probably actually would be disappointed. But it's the only effect that's kind of similar. There are a myriad of effects where a person does an effect and the deck ends in new deck order, like a triumph effect that ends in new deck order. And there's a lot of effects like that, but there's not many effects where you take a deck and you openly shuffle it and show them that the cards are all mixed up and that it goes back into new deck order. That's only really that one effect, like I mentioned, the effect Rito de Iniciación, and then the effect by Helder Guimaraes, which feels very similar to this effect, which is why I mention these effects to you guys. So there's other things you can track down if you're interested in. Anyway, that's pretty much everything I wanted to tell you guys about this download. Again, I would highly recommend it to you guys, and hopefully this review has piqued your interest in this. I think it's really a great buy. If you have any comments or questions, I welcome them. I look forward to them. So leave me any of your comments or questions here. Take a look up the links that I leave here in the description of the video. You may find some stuff that you're interested in there. Check out the Discord that I'm linking here in the description. So if you're into magic and you're looking for a new place where you want to talk to other people about magic and learn about magic, check out the Discord server that I have linked in the description here. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for tuning into my magic reviews. I'll see you on the next one.